Readers, today we are going to read about an amazing scientist and inventor named Vivian Thomas in the book Tiny Stitches, The Life of a Medical Pioneer, Vivian Thomas, by Gwendolyn Hooks. The true story tells us about his life and the work he did to create new technology for doctors and surgeons to help save lives. Specifically, he helped to save the lives of babies born with heart defects. In this book, the author gives us a lot of information, a lot of details about this technology. So today our job as readers is to take all these details and pull them together to make meaning. We are going to practice this comprehension skill or habit of thinking called synthesizing. Synthesizing means taking all the small parts to make the big picture of meaning. Let's read and think together. Needles didn't scare Vivian Thomas. In fact, he designed the ones lying on the operating table in front of him. The instruments were small and delicate like a toy, but these needles weren't toys. In a few hours, they would help save the life of a little girl. Vivian checked the instruments carefully. They were sterilized, razor sharp, and ready for a brand new type of operation that Vivian had invented. If it worked, the little girl would live to crawl, play, and grow strong like other children. But would the operation work? As I read this page, I'm thinking a lot of questions. The author started the book with a flash forward into Vivian's life, maybe to one of the most important moments, but I'm wondering about how he got there. Are you wondering or questioning about his life? Vivian Theodore Thomas grew up in Nashville, Tennessee. His father was a master carpenter who taught his son to measure, cut, and seamlessly fit pieces of wood. By the age of 13, Vivian was working alongside his father and earning enough money to buy his own clothes and shoes. He put the rest of his money in a bank to save for college. From a young age, Vivian dreamed of studying medicine with 3 colleges and a medical school for African Americans. Nashville was the perfect city in which Vivian's dream could come true. We learned several details about the beginning of Vivian's life. Remember that in a biography, the author will often tell about the person's life in chronological order, but they will choose only the most important details to demonstrate how their life made an impact on the world. What are some important details the author is revealing about the early years of Vivian's life? In October 1929, the stock market crashed, and the Great Depression that followed caused panic, hardship, and heartache throughout the United States. Banks lost their customer savings and were forced to close. Vivian was one of the unlucky people who lost all of his money. He had to start saving for college all over again. Jobs were scarce for carpenters such as Vivian and his father. People could no longer afford to buy new houses or repair old ones. Luckily, one of Vivian's friends worked at Vanderbilt University and knew about a job opening at the medical school. Vanderbilt was an all-white university. Vivian knew about the school and it would never admit him as a student. But he hoped working there meant he was getting closer to his dream of studying medicine. The author wrote, jobs were scarce for carpenters. People could no longer afford to buy a new house or repair an old house. I'm not sure what the word scarce means. Let me reread that sentence to see if the author gave me clues about what scarce might mean. It says that jobs were scarce because people didn't have a lot of money to pay people to build a new house or repair old ones. I'm thinking scarce means that there were very few jobs. Let me reread that sentence. There were very few jobs, taking the place of jobs were scarce. We learned that jobs were scarce. What are some other important details we have learned about his life? Why do you think these are important details about his life? I'm thinking the author included these details to help us to see where his life started and how this helps him get to where he is going as an inventor and scientist. When we ask ourselves, why are these important details? We are synthesizing all this information to make meaning. This is exactly what the author wants us to do. Let's keep reading and see what else we can learn. The next day, Vivian met Dr. Alfred Blalock about the job. After a brief interview, Dr. Blalock took Vivian on a tour of the lab. Chemical smells tickled Vivian's nose. His fingers itched to touch the equipment with fascinating names such as spirometer and blood gas thermometer. Dr. Blalock said he needed someone he could teach to do anything I can do and maybe do things I can't do. Vivian listened carefully as Dr. Blalock talked about his research projects. One of the projects captured Vivian's attention. Dr. Blalock explained that if a person was seriously injured and lost a lot of blood, his or her body sometimes went into shock. This meant the person's blood pressure became dangerously low because too little blood flowed to the body's organs such as the heart and lungs. This often led the patient to dying. Dr. Blalock was researching treatments for these shock patients. As Vivian listened, he also asked questions about the different procedures the doctors had tried. Dr. Blalock was impressed with Vivian and offered him the job right away. Did you notice the details on this page told us a lot about the kind of person Vivian was? We can call these his character traits. Stop and jot. What are some words you might use to describe Vivian's character? On Vivian's first day at work, Dr. Blalock asked him to put an animal to sleep to prepare for a shock treatment. Vivian was uncomfortable with the idea of using animals for research, but Dr. Blalock explained that their research could save thousands of lives, so Vivian weighed the animal and calculated how much medicine it would need to fall into a deep, painless sleep. Then he set up the blood pressure equipment. Under Dr. Blalock's supervision, Vivian learned to conduct experiments and write lab reports detailing each step. Dr. Beard, another doctor in the lab, loaned Vivian medical textbooks. He told Vivian, "It was nice to be able to do a thing, but it was better to know why you were doing it." It wasn't long before Vivian was completing experiments from start to finish on his own. Vivian and doctors are using the scientific process to make medical treatment better for people. Think of technology in your classroom and how it helps us be better students and a better teacher. Talk about how the technology you picked and explain how it helps us. Vivian's surgical techniques improved with each operation. Just as he had learned to fit pieces of wood together seamlessly, Vivian learned to suture or sew blood vessels together seamlessly. Dr. Blalock was impressed by Vivian's tiny stitches. Sometimes Vivian assisted Dr. Blalock with an experiment. On other days, Dr. Blalock assisted Vivian. Vivian was happy working as a researcher until he learned that his official job description was janitor. White men with the same duties and skills as Vivian were called research technicians and earned more money. Vivian was insulted. He was not a janitor. He told Dr. Blalock that he would not continue working unless he was paid the same as the other technicians. A few days later, Vivian noticed that his paycheck was much better. He now earned about the same as the white technicians. In 1941, Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, Maryland, invited Dr. Blalock to become chief of surgery. He accepted with one condition. His research technician, Vivian Thomas, must be invited too. Vivian didn't want to leave Nashville, but he knew he would be fired from Vanderbilt as soon as Dr. Blalock left. Many of the other doctors were not happy that Vivian had been working independently as a researcher. Vivian accepted Dr. Blalock's offer. He was excited to start his new job at Johns Hopkins as surgical technician in research. But Vivian had a hard time finding a nice home for his family in Baltimore. The better homes and apartments were for whites only. It took months for Vivian to find an apartment. Johns Hopkins was much more segregated than Vanderbilt. There were whites only and colored cafeterias and restrooms in the hospital. Vivian was the only African American working as a researcher. The stares and whispers in the hallways were worse than at Vanderbilt, but Vivian refused to let prejudice of others interfere with his work. These pages reveal some important details about the culture at the time when Vivian Thomas was living. African American people, even those working as scientific researchers, were not treated the same as white people. We also learn more about how Dr. Blalock was an important person in his life. Think about the details the author told us about his life on these pages. What is important about including the details in the story of Vivian Thomas's life? What challenges was he facing? Stop and jot. What challenges was he facing? What does this tell us about his character? Why was Vivian Thomas and Dr. Blalock's relationship important? The author included these details about the culture at the time, which was before the Civil Rights Movement, and the challenges Vivian faced because he wanted us to think about all this and what it meant. The author wanted us to synthesize, understanding his character traits, to get the big picture meaning of how his life was so impactful. In 1943, Dr. Helen Taussig, a pediatric cardiologist, visited Dr. Blalock's lab. Dr. Taussig treated children with heart problems. Many of her patients were born with heart defects that made their skin look bluish. Their bodies did not get enough oxygen, and other time the children died. Dr. Taussig called these small patients her blue babies. Most doctors refused to do open heart surgery on a child. They believed children couldn't survive such an operation. Even so, Dr. Taussig asked Dr. Blalock to find a way to operate on her heart patients. Dr. Blalock was too busy with his own patients, so he invited Vivian to do the research. Vivian headed for the Pathology Museum to investigate the collection of blue babies' hearts. He knew that a healthy heart pumps blue blood to the lungs to get oxygen. Once the blood is full of oxygen, it turns red. The red blood flows back to the heart and is delivered to every part of the body. With blue babies, however, something else was happening. Vivian noted the 4 defects in the heart that blocked some of the blue blood from reaching the lungs. This meant the blood continued to circulate throughout the body with its oxygen fill up. How do you get more blue blood to the lungs? It was a mystery Vivian was determined to solve. We are learning a lot of details about another challenge he faced. What challenge is Vivian Thomas facing? What are some of the details we are learning about his work? After a few months of experimenting, Vivian realized the solution might be a procedure he and Dr. Blalock had perfected at Vanderbilt for a different problem. The procedure involved creating a shunt between 2 arteries. If they sutured an artery coming from the heart directly to an artery going to the lungs, it would create a direct connection for the blood to make it to the lungs. Then a child's body would have all the oxygen it needed. Vivian tackled the next problem. Most needles were too long for a tiny chest and blood vessels. He needed to make needles small enough to use on a baby. Vivian snapped off a 1/2-inch long piece of needle. Holding the eye end with a clothespin, he filled the other end of the needle to a razor-sharp point. Now he had a needle short enough to stitch together tiny arteries inside a child's chest. Vivian understood that needles were too big to use with babies and remembered that operation that he did with Dr. Blalock. He solved the problem by inventing a new needle. Stop and jot. Bringing all these details together, what are you thinking about his work as an inventor and scientist? What are you thinking about why this is important? Vivian tried out his procedure and new needles on research animals. He found a way to attach 2 arteries successfully and have extra blood circulate into the lungs before it flowed back to the heart, and then throughout the body. Dr. Blalock assisted Vivian only once during his experiments. On November 29, 1944, Dr. Taussig called Dr. Blalock and Eileen one of her blue baby patients. The child was so sick that she would die if they did not operate on her immediately. Vivian knew this operation worked on animals, but would it work on a little girl? The next day he would find out. Dr. Blalock was going to perform the procedure designed by Vivian. Now Vivian is facing a big problem, one that is urgent because this little baby is so sick. What are you wondering or questioning right now? What is the problem they are facing? The morning of the operation, Vivian went to the operating room to check the instruments. Vivian headed back to the lab, but Dr. Blalock insisted he return to the operating room. Dr. Blalock asked Vivian to stand on a stool behind him and guide him through the operation. Some of the other doctors grumbled. What could Vivian possibly know? But Vivian focused on Dr. Blalock's hands and the baby on the table. Dr. Blalock opened Eileen's chest. Vivian's own heart thudded with worry. The baby's blood vessels were so small. Were his needles tiny enough? Dr. Blalock began the operation. Is my incision long enough? He asked Vivian. Yes, Vivian responded. Dr. Blalock began a suture in the wrong direction. Other way, Vivian cautioned him. 90 minutes passed. Finally, the operation was over. Would Eileen survive? Let's think in this very suspenseful moment about Vivian's character. He's facing a big challenge. The author is giving us lots of details to tell us what kind of person he was. Stop and jot. Add some words to your stop and jot which you think describe his character. Add a sentence after the word which tells why you think he is that way. What details make you think that? The baby's lips are a glorious pink color, Dr. Taussig said. Eileen did survive, and slowly over the next few hours her skin went from blue to a healthy pink color. After 2 more successful operations, Dr. Blalock and Dr. Taussig wrote a scientific paper describing their innovative surgical procedure, which they named the Blalock-Taussig shunt. National magazines such as Time and Life praised Dr. Blalock and Dr. Taussig. Vivian Thomas's name did not appear anywhere in the paper or magazine articles. She lived. This invention worked. So we know Vivian is an inventor. He not only came up with the medical procedure for saving the blue babies, but he also created medical instruments that were just the right size for babies. Have you ever had an idea for something new or an idea on how to make something better? What other scientific inventions have helped to make our lives better? As news spread of Dr. Blalock's success, 2 or 3 operations a week soon became 2 or 3 operations a day. Patients came from as far away as Europe to have the procedure. Vivian remained standing on one of the stools behind Dr. Blalock, coaching him through more than 150 operations. In 1947, Dr. Blalock and Dr. Taussig were nominated for the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine. Although they did not win, doctors from all over the world traveled to Johns Hopkins to observe and learn the new heart procedure. When Dr. Blalock was busy, the visiting doctors went to Vivian with their questions. Vivian graciously shared his knowledge and skills. Vivian Thomas was not publicly acknowledged for his brilliant research and surgical talents until more than 26 years after the first blue baby operation. On February 27, 1971, the Old Hands Club, a group of doctors who had trained under Vivian, presented a formal portrait of him to Johns Hopkins Hospital. It is displayed across from Dr. Blalock's portrait. In 1976, Johns Hopkins University awarded Vivian an honorary doctorate degree and appointed him to the faculty as instructor of surgery. Although he had never had the chance to attend medical school, Vivian's research pioneered open-heart surgery on children. Today, about 40,000 children are born each year with heart problems. Because of Vivian Thomas, these children now have a chance to live full and healthy lives. The author gives us lots of details about the later years of Vivian's life on these pages. His scientific research and inventions had a very important impact on medicine and how doctors can help people. Stop and jot. What was the impact of Vivian's scientific breakthrough? Why do you think these details about his later life are important too? What do they tell us about the lasting impact of his life?